In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Lizzie Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome all you lords, ladies, and knights to the Retro Movie Roundtable. Welcome to the show where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Russell Guest, from the Steel City of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And joining me today are a bunch of my good friends and co-hosts here. We've got a pretty full studio here today. Mr. Chad Robinson joining me from the Steel City. How you doing, sir?
I mean, we are all in various states of undress, so this is fantastic.
Yes, I've been training for months at a time to get my body in shape for this episode, so I'm ready. Also joining us from the Lone Star State, Mr. Dustin Melbardis from deep in the heart of Texas. How you doing, sir?
Good evening, all. I'm doing really well. Let's get wild tonight.
All right, and also joining us from the Lilac City. That sounds so nice and pretty. The Spokane, Washington, Mr. Brian Fry. How you doing, sir?
It's mostly calming. If Dustin has the Magnum PI going right now, I'd say I'm the Ryan Fitzpatrick.
You have the Leonidas beard ready for tonight.
Right.
I've been readying and training for months for this with my big muscles. I'm not a big person. This is sarcasm. But Brian literally does have the Leonidas beard, so...
I think I'd be a little old for Sparta, though. I would truly be considered a graybeard by their standards.
Yeah, you're at like politician age. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very firmly... They've retired me a while ago.
It means we made it, right? It means we survived.
Yeah.
Well, we have been doing the show now for 300 episodes. This is our 300th show. It's been a lot of fun. We've done this since 2018, and to celebrate this, Chad has been campaigning for, a long time, saying the 300th episode needs to be none other than the movie 300. Here we are. So we're all here together. And so name a movie that stood up to face poor reviews, poor box office returns, and stood up against the world. And it was a hit for you. Dustin.
I can't say for sure that it had like really been like this big of a dud. I went well off of the tomato meter, like low down. 21% is House of a Thousand Corpses.
Boo.
I
Boo
know.
Jasper, boo.
I know. And it's considered one of the worst movies of all time on a couple of lists that I found. But even still, this is one that for some reason it caught me at the right time. And I thought it was fun. I thought it was cool. I liked Rob Zombie's style. I think it does not, like it objectively isn't good, but it stands up for me.
Yeah.
I found another list of like 100 movies, and there was one of them on there that was part of my childhood, but it has a 0% ranking on the tomato meter, and that's Problem Child. Are you guys familiar with Problem Child?
I am.
Yeah, dude.
Zero?
Zero.
Really?
Yeah,
Zero?
so that was a big surprise. But the one that's like objectively bad that I actually like is House of a Thousand Corpses.
Okay, now Brian, how about you? What's a movie that stood up against the odds for you and was a hit for you?
I have a friend at work named Tucker who I haunt him with this movie, not just with quotes, but because it irritates him that I like it. And I've actually had a couple other booksellers come in over the years and be like, oh yeah, that is a good movie. And it makes him really just hate things. And that's 13th Warrior. It gets trashed all the time. Antonio Banderas plays a warrior, bard, and poet from the Middle East who goes to be with the Northmen. And it's actually based on a real book, but it was adapted for a story by Michael Crichton, and then later turned into a movie starring Antonio Banderas. I love the movie. I think it's it might be the best Viking movie for me. And anyway, I quote it all the time. I mess with him with it all the time. It's got terrible reviews. Totally holds up for me. I probably watch it, I don't know, once a quarter. 13th Warrior.
Wow, I sense a dealer's choice coming at some point for this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's going to happen.
Inflict it upon us.
Just so you know, Brian does the staff picks with all of his dealer's choice. Like, Blockbuster's long gone, but, his dealer's choice is where it lives on. Chad, how about you? What movie stood up against the odds? Was a hit for you?
I mean, as a horror movie fan, how much time do we have? Like, I can go down this list. Dustin says House of a Thousand Corpses is one of the worst movies of all time. No, that doesn't even make the bottom 1,000 of the barrel I have scraped. But I went down this rabbit hole. Super Troopers has 36% Rotten Tomatoes. That
Wow.
is incredible. But I'm going to go down the Broken Lizard rabbit hole. Club Dread.
Club
I
Dread.
love
That's a good
Club
one.
Dread.
Slam and Salmon too. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say even more unknown than that one. Slam and Salmon was still funny.
I feel like Club Dread is the most hated of their
I agree.
archive, and I love it. It's a good time.
I actually have never seen that one. I'll have to check it out at some point.
There's a brilliant maze scene that I really want to
the
have in
Pac-Man?
real life. Yes.
That was good.
Is that the one where the guy is like a massage guru and
Yes.
he can like
Yes.
Jay Chandrasekhar, yeah. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
I've
he
seen
does
that
a
movie
weird
twice. I
accent.
think that's one too many times.
Oh, that's fair.
My movie that stands up against the odds. It's a 12% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics. A little better with the general population at 54%. I've asked this question before, so I'm going to mix it up a little bit. But this time I'm going to throw another one out there that's underappreciated. And I'm going to say Sorority Boys. Stars Barry Watson, Michael Rosenbaum, and Harland Williams as guys posing as women. And that's always funny.
Okay. That sounds like an adult film.
It does sound like an adult film.
It's rated R, if that's what you mean.
Spicy.
Russell's like 12%. I can't believe critics didn't go for this.
It's a good time. I would go to bat for it. It's not highbrow. You're not going in for. It's not a thinker kind of movie. So prepare yourself. Just bring yourself down to your 6th grade inner self and just laugh and have a good time with it. So, well, today we are going to cover, as I previously mentioned, Chad, you can introduce it because this was your baby.
I cannot do a firm, confident voice, but we are going to do the movie 300 from 2007.
That is a very confident Chad, by the way. Like that's full confidence right there.
I don't have the like TED Talk speech, just amplified.
We don't do TED Talk here. What do you? Yeah,
I feel like that's what Leonidas was doing at every single juncture of this movie. There's like a TED Talk, pump people up.
So 300 comes out in 2007 in the United States. It had limited releases in 2006. Its budget was $65 million. Decent budget, but it grosses an impressive $210 million domestically. It was the highest grossed rated R movie comic book film ever made until the release of Deadpool in 2016. It placed all the way up at number 10 in the box office that year, just behind Alvin and the Chipmunks.
It's so frustrating.
Just behind Alvin and the Chipmunks and ahead of Ratatouille.
Also frustrating. Ratatouille is great. Alvin and the Chipmunks. What happened? No, Ratatouille is charming. I love Remy. That's a great movie. Alvin the Chipmunks is garbage. Like, why is this a thing? And then they had the audacity to make the squeakquel.
They did. And there was a threequel too. So, but anyway. Speaking of threequels, the number one movie from 2007 is Spider-Man 3. So,
yep,
that's sad.
It's not as bad as you said, Chad.
This movie is so much better than Spider-Man 3. It's insane.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
like there's an exponent.
IMDb gives 300 a 7.6. The critics of Rotten Tomatoes give it a 61%. The audience likes it a good bit more at 89%. It is an award winner. It gets the Saturn Awards, 2-time winner for Best Director and Best Action Adventure Thriller Film. And it got a ton of Saturn nominees for various things, 8 of those. It's the Golden Icon Awards winner for 2, Best Dramatic Film and Best Action Film, stretching it a bit as a dramatic film, but the Icon Awards felt like it was. Gets the prestigious MTV Movie Awards winner Popcorn Trophy for Best Fight for Leonidas battling the Uber Immortal. MTV Movie Awards also gave it 4 more nominees for Best Movie, Best Performance for Gerard Butler, Best Breakthrough Performance for Lena Headey, Best Villain for Rodrigo Santoro. Costume Designer Guild Awards give this an Excellence in Fantasy Film, and Satellite Award winner for Best Visual Effects. I'm surprised there aren't more visual effects here because this is a very stylish movie. Now, let's get into this one. Dustin, have you seen 300 before? What was it like coming back to it today? And give us your experience with this.
This may have been the year in college that we lived together, Russell. I did see it in theaters. Went to go see it in Knoxville, and I went to go see it with my girlfriend at the time, who, if you can believe it, one of the things I made fun of for so long, she fell asleep in this movie.
Wow, how?
Almost unbelievable. When they're coming across the burned cities at or burned village, and the little kid comes out, it was, I guess, just a period of it being quiet and slow for her to pass out. But moving on from her, this movie I have now seen probably 20 times all the way through. It makes a lot of our lists. I mean, by our I mean men. By our I mean guys of a certain age. It makes the list of just hugely impactful, incredibly blocked, visually stunning. The style, it's oozing with style. Was new to us as far as make decision into the sepia tones and all that stuff. Music is kicking. I mean, I know there's some controversy about it, but coming back to it this time, I did not need to rewatch it to do this show, but of course I did. I did not attempt to be more critical or anything. I kind of know this movie like the back of my hand. I guess I can say, of course, it holds up. Now, there might be things that, I guess, now what are we looking at? This is 18 years old now. That's kind of surprising. To think about like how long ago and how long this movie has been part of my life. But it holds high regard. It always has. I think there's a lot of guys. If you've seen this, you have a battle in your brain as well. Which of these like 5, 6, 7 awesome scenes is my favorite, and it'll switch every time. So I'm coming in with the high expectations, and I think a lot of us probably.
All right. Chad, how about you? Have you seen 300 before? What was your experience with it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I saw it in theaters as well. Same as Dustin. I am an apologist for the movie Troy. This kind of falls into the same category of not necessarily meant to be a good movie, but it's meant to be an entertaining movie. And I like these entertaining sword and board type films. And based on a graphic novel that I'm very familiar with, I enjoyed that. So this was a period where I was happy to see Zack Snyder's name on stuff. Like, you see Dawn of the Dead, which is one of my favorite movies. We had this, and I go on, I'm like, all right, this guy, me and him, we get along. Now that's faded out. To your point about whether it's held up, I think it does. The problem 300 has is because it was so stylish, it got parodied to death. And so everybody's copying these slow-mo scenes. And I think I got a little bit tired of that era. I haven't seen it nearly as many times as Dustin. I would probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen for this movie. It is something that I frequently go back to, but I think I got a little burnout of that particular style, and I had to give it some breathing room of being able to appreciate what it does because just so many people copied it or made fun of it that I got exhausted of it.
I understand that.
I watched this movie after everybody talked it up. Everybody really praised this movie and said, this thing's amazing. This is like The Matrix. This is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Dustin, you were part of the hype train, and I definitely was immersed in everybody who absolutely loved this movie. Mary and I watched this one. I wasn't taken by it. The style was there, and I had seen Sin City. Sin City really impressed me.
Yes.
Maybe it was the neo-noir setting. I came in saying, this is Frank Miller again. Different director, and perhaps the bar is set pretty high. And so I don't always get excited for this type of movie, like the Braveheart movie, like we're going to do a historic battle kind of thing. It may not always work for me. Now, it does work in Lord of the Rings when it is attached to a whole lot of other fantasy lore and stuff, but I took it for granted. I think you mentioned it, Chad. It was stylized and promoted at the time. I'm far enough away from it. I can appreciate what it did for the visual style of movie making at the time. It stands above that. I still maintain the story is really, really slim. Not all the acting's fantastic, but I think this movie endures. It means a whole lot to a lot of people. And my initial take did not take the time to look at how this movie was made and the style of it. And I think my opinion of it has gone up because of that. So, Fry, I'm going to pass this to you, and you will say much nicer things than I just did, undoubtedly. So,
I think Russell has you have an issue with pseudo homoerotic movies such as Top Gun. This is the Top Gun issue. Attractive men playing beach volleyball, Russell's out. Attractive men having a battle shirtless, once again, you're out. Like, just embrace it, dude.
Give him a hug. Wash a shirt on it.
I try to avoid being on certain episodes so I don't take people's fun away from them, but Chad really wanted me here tonight, so here I am, and I will soldier on.
Saw it in theaters, loved it. I am a huge Frank Miller fan. I completely agree with Chad on the overplay. Everybody latched on to this. This was easier to rip off than the bullet time animation for The Matrix and not look like you were ripping something off. Even though it was still fairly clear this is where you got it from, it wasn't nearly as overtly plagiarized, or it was much easier to overtly plagiarize than something like The Matrix when you're doing something cool. Basically, this movie's only fault is it came up with something cool that people could overtly plagiarize without it being completely pointed at as being overt plagiarism. If they had tried to use bullet time, it was like, oh, you got this directly from The Matrix because it's very specific. But this came up with something where people could use it and satire it basically to death. And part of that is because it's men fighting with their shirts off. So, it got that run out of it too. So if you take it at its face value for what it was worth when it first came out, I think it's a phenomenal movie. But man, it really did get soap put in socks and beaten to death after it came out. But that's not its fault. That's people running away with it. So I saw this when it came out in theaters. I absolutely loved it. I didn't watch most of the things plagiarizing it and or making fun of it, so that helps. Scary Movie 6 or whatever movies that came out, making cracks at it.
Just 1 year later was Meet the Spartans.
Yeah, I mean, whatever, whatever it is. It's just that's not really my place in film. So that helps it a whole lot. So to this day, I don't watch it as much as Chad does, but when I do watch it, it's, I'm going to watch 300. Let's go.
Well, we will come back with spoilers. So if you haven't seen 300, check it out. You're going to want to see it. We'll be back after these messages.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason, and this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
All right, we're back, and this is your final warning. There will be spoilers that lie ahead. Chad, for those who haven't seen the movie 300 since 2007, do you want to refresh people's memories?
In Sparta, warriors are forged in fire, raised to know no fear. Leonidas, the embodiment of Spartan valor, faces an ultimatum from Xerxes, the self-proclaimed god king of Persia. Bow or perish. Leonidas chooses defiance. With 300 of his finest warriors, he marches to the Hot Gates, a narrow pass where numbers mean nothing against Spartan discipline. The Persian army comes, a tide of flesh and steel. War beasts roar, arrows blot out the sun, and the immortal Xerxes' elite descend upon them. But the Spartans stand unbroken, a wall of shields and spears, tearing through wave after wave. Their courage inspires allies, though none match their resolve. Yet even as their glory grows, treachery slithers into their midst. A deformed Spartan, Ephialtes, betrays them, revealing a secret path to the enemy. Surrounded, the Spartans make their final stand. Leonidas, with spear in hand, strikes a blow that scars the god king, proving even a god can bleed. In the end, the 300 fall, their bodies broken, but their defiance immortal. Their sacrifice ignites the fires of rebellion across Greece, uniting the free against Persian tyranny.
Why don't we take a fun game here? Let's see. What do you think the body count in this movie is? Price is Right rules, without going over. Dustin, what's the body count of 300?
Ooh, that is a fun game. Okay, I'm gonna guess 210.
Okay. Yeah. Chad, what's your body count?
575.
Okay. And Brian, what is your body count?
One body roll. No.
That's not bad.
No,
God,
I'm going bigger. I'm gonna go an even grand.
Oh, okay. Chad, you were eerily close. So much so it makes me question if your homework has gotten you this close. You're at 575, a cautious 10 bodies under, just without going over. So
nice.
that is really tough to beat. So I like the one body bid, though. That's pretty good.
I'm just like, I'll take one body, Bob.
All right. Well, we have Leonidas in his final words saying, "May you live forever. You are an insult against the hunchback's desire to be a Spartan whose greatest glory is to die on the battlefield." That line there says so much about this movie here. Let's talk about this here. This is about that Spartan heritage. This is about a culture that is, from the time they're young, they're ready to become warriors. And here we are making a David against Goliath kind of stand against a massive army. Chad, why don't you take it from here? I mean, what is it that makes people so excited to step into this world here?
I think it's just the movie tells you from the very beginning that these are insurmountable odds, and then has the courage and bravery to stick to that. Because how many movies do we get? Oh, these are impossible odds. There's no way we survive. And everyone comes out unscathed. It's just like, okay, we have manly men. Let's face it, because this movie has so much machismo. Like, I'm going to have Brian's beard by the end of talking about this. And it's just men being their absolute manliest, staring down impossible odds, saying, we're going to die, but we're going to take as many of these bastards as we can with us and delight in our deaths, and just the roaring in the face of death. There's so many cool things about that. And I think on some level, you kind of wish you would have that courage in those type of hours. We watch films like Saving Private Ryan, which are far more real, of someone terrified in the face of death. They're not laughing. They're not having a good time. They're not bragging about dining in hell. They are just terrified. Rightfully so. Here we have a completely different image. And then there's so many cool things that we get introduced from the Persian side. There are so many alien and foreign and magical things. The immortals and how they're introduced is just so cool. Xerxes, man, making Xerxes essentially wearing a diaper and be the coolest person in this friggin' movie, like, I'd side with that dude. He just oozed charisma, giving me an eyebrow.
I wish I had a voice that deep. I like even not being 9 feet tall, like Xerxes in this. If I just had Xerxes' voice when I answered the phone, and people were like, never mind, I'm good. I don't remember why I called. Click.
This is Brian. I am kind.
It's that Michael Clark Duncan voice where you're just like, man, that's good. Leaving on a jet plane. Just great voice.
The culture of hardened by their childhood, that only so many can go through this process and come out the elite Spartan warrior that they need in order to fulfill this tradition of combat, of being the best there are. I will say, of the things that I say that I believe have held up, one of the things that has held up that I think is kind of toxic for the world is this kind of masculinity that kind of spawned from this Leonidas, from this perfect Spartan, that has become a goal for young men to try to reach through means that perhaps make them not as well-rounded people. That's all I'll say about that, is that the real world masculinity impact of a movie like this has, I think, been detrimental to the kind of young men we want to foment in a modern age. What I'm getting at here is that, notwithstanding, we are given comic book world and comic book background that these guys are the best. It's not because these are like a special group of like commandos like Predator. Like, no, everybody here is trained to be like this and to work within this unit. And so the movie gives you like the background enough in another type of war movie or warrior movies, or I think about like soldier movies. There's a phrase that I don't come back to often, but the person that like wants to die for their country, the point is to make the other guys die for their country.
Right.
The desire, the character that is mad in I need to give my life on the battlefield should be, I think, and is frequently shown as like, okay, that person actually needs a little help. That person needs to be talked to. You did not enlist to die. And if you did, then you need some help. But this entire culture is, oh, we long for a death on the battlefield. And in general, you would say, not so good. But because this is a fantasy comic book world happening in 450 BC or whatever it is, we can move past that pretty quickly. These are just warriors bred and trained. And that gets us to the level of cool where we don't have to like question this bloodlust, or we don't have to question this desire for death. And to have it juxtaposed as we are the best warriors in the world, and we're so good that very few of us will die. And to pair that with but we all want it real bad. We really want to die real bad. It gives you enough context to say, now that we understand this, let's enjoy the fighting. Let's enjoy the spectacle.
Now, Fry, you're a big fan of these kind of comics, these graphic novels. Have you been familiar with the Frank Miller content?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Sin City's what got me into Frank Miller in the first place. So film was the gateway drug to the comics in the first place, which has happened on several notable ones. I hadn't read V for Vendetta, I don't think, before I saw the movie. So, sometimes, it happens the other way around where I'm like, oh, I want to see that. Oh, it's a graphic novel. Okay, I'm going to read that. Old Guard is another one. Good. So yeah, I snag up, when I can, I try my best to read it before I watch it. It's really the Frank Miller art. It's the art / dialogue style that he chooses to employ. It's very singular to him. I think it becomes hard sometimes with comic books specifically to distinguish between artists. There are a few that have a very specific fingerprint. We see the same thing in film. So I definitely think that there's no one really like him. I think the real gem of both Sin City and 300, regardless of how you felt about the sequels, is they were able to adapt how the stylized nature of it to film very well.
Would you also count, I think, Kill Bill in 2003 as another forerunner of this?
Yeah, Kill Bill. No matter how you feel about Kill Bill, yes.
Kill Bill's kind of coming into this as well, with obviously Sin City, another Frank Miller project. You can trace how it got to here from those things.
I think the thing that I like the most about movies like this, and I will say it's true of, I think, every comic or adaptation comic book movie that I've watched, specifically the non-mainstream DC Marvel ones, they all have a pageantry to them that is a lot of fun. V for Vendetta had a signature pageantry to it. This clearly has a pageantry to it. Sin City, even though it's more of a clipped thing, there's a vibe, there's an attitude to it that lends it to being a singular film. I actually think it's one of the reasons that the sequels don't do as well, because once you've had that dose of it, if the content isn't as good, then it's lacking in, your fallback to being like, well, yeah, but it was pretty. Atomic Blonde is the epitome of this. The coalescence of every part that went into Atomic Blonde made it a very singular movie. I think that's what really gets me latching on, especially to the more indie comic film adaptations, is I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see what they do with this.
I think Frank Miller said that I didn't want to render Sparta in overly accurate terms, because ultimately I do want you to root for the Spartans. I could not show them for being quite as cruel as they really were. I had made them as cruel as I thought modern audiences could stand. I think this is an important distinction. I think anybody criticizing this movie, I think Braveheart certainly had some of this, like, it's not accurate.
We certainly have history, and we have several Greek scholars that have written about the Battle of Thermopylae. I mean, we have monuments and everything else of where the 300 Spartans lie, but it's a far less interesting story if you say, yeah, 300 Spartans, and then there are 5 to 7,000 allies. And it's far less cool if you show the helots of Sparta, which were the slaves, when they're giving speeches about free men. It's like, well, Sparta, you kind of did this. Or instead of having that nice moment with Leonidas and Ephialtes of you can't lift your shield, knowing that he would have been set out for exposure as an infant, because that was Spartan law. If a child had a defect, they were placed out and exposed to the elements and died. Like it's a brutal environment. So there's a lot of ugly things in the culture. If we have the history, it's been written about and fairly consistent, but it's a lot cooler the way Frank Miller did it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it's fair to say that the subject matter of this movie, based on the things that Chad is talking about, with like the very ancient history of this, is that it required heavy romanticization, and that's okay. We've been doing that for 100 years.
Longer than that, if you go like Iliad and the Odyssey, it's like, look, they did it. They did it to themselves. They're like, yeah, it's shiny.
Yeah, so like that's, I don't think there's, I guess I should take that back, is that there's going to be people that certainly say like, well, if we're thinking about the historical accuracy of what Sparta was, then perhaps they could lose some of their enjoyment for this movie. And I think that happens across anything that is slightly related to history at all. But as long as we can make the point to say what we're doing is championing this cool graphic novel and this stylized story with its incredible imagery, then that's where it can be successful. I don't think anyone's trying to apologize for, well, actually, Spartans weren't that bad. No, we know how cruel and bad.
Nobody wants to sit here and see, apparently, Queen Gorgo was the daughter of Leonidas' half-brother, Cleomenes.
Wait till you see what they were doing in Athens.
Yeah, she has a thing with relative incest. Game of Thrones.
She's still pretty.
What is that comment, Fry? You're like, if she were my sister,
I'm just saying, you can say what you want about her acting parts. She's still pretty.
Brian's just clarifying. He's saying it's not sister, it's the daughter of his half-brother. And that's completely different when it's Lena Headey.
Still makes you her uncle?
Brian's smile's fading, but I mean...
It's a small...
It's a stale...
But
yeah, you got distracted by incest. That's right.
I lost my train of thought.
It said right there on the video, it said stepdad.
Oh gosh. Oh no. What's the equivalent of a Spartan washer that she could get stuck in or dryer?
Oh god. I will make it legal.
You will not enjoy this.
Oh god.
300th episode. Time to load up on the spice.
I think it's interesting, though, that maybe Chad pointed it out. This is a losing effort. We don't see a lot of movies where they're trounced, like, they're trampled, and they glorify that. That in itself is a unique thing. Honestly, that made me have a hard time putting my arms around this movie. I would rather see the Helm's Deep thing where all of your lead characters come out of it unscathed and with really good hair. They do help you out a lot. They don't make you latch on to the characters very much. So I think that is strategic. Like, they don't want you to really fall in love with most of these characters. I mean, Dominic West's character Tiernan, or Stelios, David Wenham's character, Fassbender's in this movie as Stelios. These are not characters that you really put your arms around.
Russell, these are not characters that you don't put your arms around and come to love.
They prepare you to lose them. That's my point.
It's like saying being surprised at the end of Titanic. This story is written, Russell. At the Hot Gates, the 300 die at Thermopylae. You can't change it that hard. Inglorious Bastards gives us the big change, and that's fun and cool. But this wasn't going to end up with, we're going to get up after the arrows hit. No. It must happen this way, or it must happen in a stylish way. There's a lot of ways that you can say, going from, you said they get trampled. It's battle supremacy from the Spartans for most of the movie. It is a betrayal from Ephialtes and the discovery of the goat path, at least in this story, that has led to, we are sunk, we are lost, we're going to die. And then what we have is this sort of, it's not plot armor, it's like heroic forethought. Is we kind of knew this was going to happen. I did not take in the whole army, I'm taking 300 men. I have the forethought to know that this bloodlust sacrifice, that to die a warrior's death, is going to be in store for these 300 of my men, and that it's going to end with that which will lead to glory for our names, glory for our city, honor on the battlefield. I have to disagree with the idea about like getting trampled. It is calculated that they die in that.
And they got to make a human meat wall.
They got to make a human meat wall.
That's an interesting point for how we experience this movie,
Yeah.
because I hadn't heard of Thermopylae. I didn't know what I was getting for. I didn't know anything. So I went in expecting a win, to be honest with you.
Aha.
Oh,
It's a pretty-
man.
I had no framing of this, and I also avoid spoilers heavily. So if somebody starts talking about it, I remove myself from the situation. I tune out. I know as little as I can about any movie that I see. And so you're right. This did subvert my expectations.
I'm going to go grab my Herodotus book from behind me and throw it at you right now. Go read it.
I'll trade you books. I'll give you some architectural
That's fine.
literature, and we'll exchange.
And
Thanks.
Russell, just a year earlier, or I guess no, 4 years earlier, if you had watched The Last Samurai, this is the exact thing that Katsumoto and Algren are talking.
Yeah, they even reference it.
Yeah.
They even reference Thermopylae.
What happened to the 300 at Thermopylae? And he responds back with a smile, dead to the last man. Like, this is known. And I
Yeah.
think now we have revealed 47 minutes into our show. This is why you're like, well, I kind of expected a big win. Yeah, of course you would. But now that you know,
Yeah.
it's like, I kind of expected the Titanic to turn around and head on back to London after. Like, no, you got.
They said it was unsinkable.
Yeah.
False
lied.
advertising.
Yeah, the
Yeah, Chad,
glory
go.
in this is seeing how many they can take with them before they get taken down.
Yeah.
And for 2
Which
days,
is awesome.
yeah, for 2 days we lose like one guy, and that's about it. And the overall body count is still stunning. I told you there's like 5 to 7,000. There's a little bit of differences. 20,000 Persians to 2,000 Greeks died. That's a stunning difference. And they were betrayed through that goat path. Ephialtes is like a curse in Greek.
Yeah.
It's their version of Judas. And so if you called someone an Ephialtes, it's calling them a Judas. He's not a Spartan in history. He's a Trachinian, but
Uh-huh.
same thing. But that's why we're watching. We know this is doomed, but it's like, how many can they take with them, and how cool is it going to be? And getting to see the phalanx in
Oh,
that's awesome, with all the shields linked and all the spears, and just thinking about how chaotic that would be and how terrifying that would be, having 5,000 people pushing against you and against your shields. That's just and knowing if the dude beside you doesn't do his job, you're dead. And all of them are working as this perfect unit. Now it gets frustrating because they break phalanx and then they're just out in the open swinging swords. Like, now
Because it looks cool.
it is.
But
It's
it's
true.
cool.
Your tactical advantage is gone because you're in the open.
Chad, I feel like I don't want to leave any of these points in the dust, especially now that we've made this revelation about Russell's sort of expectations for the movie. But because I could talk about the fight scenes and the phalanx and the formations and all that stuff like for the next 3 hours. But the thing about your expectations, Russell, the idea of avoiding spoilers is, do you think the movie actually preps you for what the goal is from Leonidas's perspective, from the oracles, or from the oracle at the top of the cliff, from the idea of there being gold with Xerxes' face on it, the idea of They had already infiltrated both the, I guess you wouldn't call it parliament. What would you, the politician side?
Yeah, their
The,
legislature.
they've infiltrated there and infiltrated the sort of old order of mystics at the top of the mountain. I think there is enough foreshadowing to know that these men are intentionally going to inflict a lot of damage. Essentially, this is said, like, make them pay so dearly that they don't want to fight anymore. Maybe this is the question, Russ. Does the movie do a bad job setting you up for what you know is going to happen?
My experience is incredibly different here. I thought Gorgo, Lena Headey's character, was going to rally with the proper support from their elected leaders to send in the full army, and they had to hold out long enough that then the other people could come and hold them off. Again, my knowledge of history is not, I'm not aware that if this is the final blow to all of Sparta and they all fall or whatever. So if you say, we're going to watch a movie about Rudy, then everybody just tramples on top of him. He's a pancake with like cleat marks on him and he's bleeding, and they take him back to the locker room and they say, I told you he shouldn't have played football. I mean, it's not a very good movie. So, I mean, that's why.
Or he gets called for being offsides.
Okay.
Rudy was offsides.
He was totally offsides.
But I'll be honest with you, they built me up for hope of there's more coming. Obviously, these 300.
Well, and let's be honest, who doesn't love a good reinforcement scene? I mean, that's in every war movie in the history of war movies that I've watched, whether it's, Lord of the Rings when the riders of Rohan arrive, whether it's Avengers Endgame on your left. I mean,
oh my gosh,
you can go, I mean, it gives you chills. The reinforcement scenes are the bomb. It doesn't matter how many times it's been done. When it happens, your hair raises on end. I mean, just listening to Russell talk about it, yeah, that would have been cool. It's just not what happened.
Yeah.
So, and you do get a small measure of that because you get David Wenham's character telling the story. You don't know why he's narrating this until the end. It's one of my favorite scenes of the movie because you realize at the end of it, it's like, oh, okay, well, you thought 300 was bad. How about this? So it's not. Yeah, it's 10,000 who are even crazier because now they have martyrs. And it's like, wow. So, I mean, it doesn't maybe hit quite the same way, but you still get like a modicum of that, feeling that you get from the reinforcement scene because it's like, man, you're about to get.
And this movie doesn't attempt to be Braveheart with its political scenes of what this is all about.
They leave that to the second one.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, with better execution, I think if the 300 battle had been like in the first third of the movie, and this had gone towards uniting Greece to fight, to take the city-states together and to fight against this giant, unbeatable entity, I think that might also have put me in a different frame of mind. Again, I just put my blinders on, how you could say it, and so I'm not used to a movie where you come out of it. And I'll use Private Ryan as another one, not to give too many spoilers. That movie doesn't feel good at the end. I mean, to accomplish what the movie is accomplishing, and again, it's a real story, but the great loss that you endure doesn't leave you feeling like, man, this is cool. And what does give 300 a lot of credit, that does differently than, like, say, Private Ryan, where it doesn't just feel good, it is incredibly stylized. I don't think we've talked enough about that. It's Matrix-like mechanics of the physics of the battlefield, and this is why Zack Snyder was handed the keys to the DC cinematic universe. It's this movie. And they had placed a lot of faith in him. I don't know that his endeavors with DC went as planned, but he did Watchmen. 300, actually, this was even before Watchmen. I take it back. This is his second movie after Dawn of the Dead, which I know, the remake of Dawn of the Dead, which I know you're a big fan of, Chad. This is the movie that builds Snyder's career, that carries him through the next 20 years.
I liked it.
And,
a few years ago, I remember I was saying that one was a disappointment for me, but what was not disappointing was the heaps of style that Snyder brought to it. Yeah.
I think Sucker Punch is very cool looking. It's just they kind of go to the well one too many times for me. Like, we're doing the same thing slightly differently. I think they do it essentially 4 times. It wears a little bit thin, but yeah, I know Brian's a big Sucker Punch proponent.
Everything was blue screen. and behind them. Everything. They had pieces within the set, like they might have like a rock that they're climbing on, or like a few building elements that they construct in a set. But they do a lot to create the world that's around you. The skies, the battlefield, all of that stuff that's in there. This is a big advancement for the computer world, because you don't have to go that much farther behind this movie to see some really bad CGI fail miserably. And I gotta give this movie credit. This is a turning point where it's not coming off as disingenuous. The ambition to try something big with the computer effects didn't fail. And it didn't fail to deliver. Even now, going back and looking at it, it still looks good. And it's because of those stylized things.
Yeah, nothing strikes me as not holding up as far as the looks. Any of the exotic creatures that they bring in, they all look cool. I don't know if there was any practical effects that they put CGI over. It almost like it's been modeled out of clay or something. I don't know, but the CGI is not distracting, and that's the best thing you can say when they put in quite a bit like this movie. One thing I did want to say is we talk about the bad things of Spartan culture. One of the things I think they did do a good job, Spartan culture had responses, and they had a specific way of responding, and they would call it laconic, and it was short and witty. And we get a lot of those laconic type responses. One of the famous ones in history is somebody sent a message to Sparta that said, "If we invade Sparta, you will fall." And Sparta sends back the message, "If." That was their response. And they didn't wind up getting invaded in that instance. And we get a bunch of those witty responses here with, "Our arrows will blot out the sun, and we will fight in the shade." That's just cool to say, and you wish you had the wit and intelligence
Yeah,
to
it's
spit that out.
sharp.
It also adds to my further enjoyment of the movie the idea that there's a historical context to that kind of wit. You know, well, I've got this thing about my leg, you see. Kneeling's not going to
Yes.
work for me. You might think, oh, this is cheeky, but the idea that there is a historical way of how they, with prose or with the written word, that's a very cool tidbit.
Zack Snyder originally wanted Brad Pitt for the role of Leonidas. Pitt turns down the role and chooses to do Mr. and Mrs. Smith instead at this point. Do you guys want Brad Pitt as Leonidas?
No, like not even a little bit. Although I don't think.
Is that Troy making you say that?
Oh, he is
No.
Achilles. He was great as Achilles.
It's great as Achilles, yeah. We like that.
This movie gave us Gerard Butler, by and large, and I realized that his list of accolades isn't as long as probably I'd like it to be. Look, anytime you can get a guy who can give you a couple, great movies. I mean, Law Abiding Citizen is still one of my favorite, twisty films. If this movie gave me that, then it's introducing a new player. I mean, you look at Michael Fassbender in this movie. So there are a lot of really niche players who go on to do a lot of great things in this, and I think adding a star, air quotes on that, I think that detracts from what you're doing in the film.
He had already been the Phantom of the Opera.
But we don't want Gerard Butler as the Phantom of the Opera.
Well, that whole production didn't go as well as we wanted, but yeah.
And I mean, honestly, I kind of applaud Emmy Rossum as our Christine in that movie. But the idea is that's not the Gerard Butler path that we had wanted. And he dips into other romance movies and stuff, but that's where but you're Leonidas.
P.S. I love you.
What we want is your full macho self, at least for me. That's what I had thought was the right path for him. I didn't think about Brian's point. I agree. You don't want star power as this. You want the emergent of this ensemble.
Yeah, I like not being able to recognize them. And Brad Pitt, if I lose Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I am very, very sad because I love that movie. That is one of the all-time sexiest films. Him and Angelina, man, that's a favorite of my wife and I's.
I saw that movie in theaters and I enjoyed it, but it was hard for me to enjoy it because I went with 3 friends and my 3 friends were tripping on something, and that was a big distraction.
Oh.
Well, I also was impressed, given the amount of computerized techniques in here. None of the actors are enhanced, which you commonly see now. Like, I kind of assumed it had been. Gerard Butler just spent on average 4 hours a day training in the gym straight for 4 months. ahead of time just to get enrolled for the Shape of the King. The entire cast underwent a rigorous 8-week training regime. Mark Twight was the record-holding professional mountain climber who put them through exercise routines, preventing their body from adapting to any one kind of exertion, so he would work the mountain in a completely different, unique way with a rigorous way of doing it. So all the actors were pushed to their absolute limits. Their body hurt in different spots and just totally achy every day in order to get in this shape. But they did it, and it's real. I just assumed computers helped these guys out this much, but nope, they're really that in shape. That's what it takes to be a Spartan. And so they push themselves like Spartans.
I like that there was the assumption that the Spartan in the back was just wearing a muscle t-shirt.
Yeah.
Like that's where you're going with this. No, I assumed, to Dustin's point of maybe some of the negative things that came out of this movie, is this body type. This body type became upheld. And to your point, Russell, a normal guy cannot get this shape and tone in 8 weeks. It doesn't matter. That's your job to look like that for 8 weeks. So there becomes a bit of an unhealthy ideal here. But for a stylized movie, it's fine. You just have to recognize this is a stylized movie. This is what they look like, not your average guy. You can't live at the gym and look like this.
Yeah, even Lena Headey was talking about being on scene. Again, they're wearing hardly anything. She said, I was surrounded by flesh everywhere. Yes. And, she's oozing confidence, and she's a very pretty lady herself, but she was even sitting there kind of like, I'm kind of in this candy shop here for the first couple of days. After time, you adjust, and they're the actors, your friends you're working with, and you adjust. And going forward, she said, but it was funny to see her perspective on that, because there's not a whole lot of ladies in this movie.
You're talking about an effect. It wasn't until you just mentioned that there are not a lot of ladies in this movie, but you've got the oracle at the top of the mountain, and that's a very cool visual scene that I had read that the way they were able to get those cool flowing motions is they actually put her and filmed her underwater. And I'm like, that's smart and cool. And those guys are so creepy, and we know that they're corrupt, and we know that they are lascivious and all this stuff. And upon rewatch, I knew where there were the parts that I was like, yeah, I remember this part, but I was trying to pay a little more attention this time to like, that is cool. And the idea that she speaks out in some unknown tongue and he has to translate for her. It's another little bit of foreshadowing, like Sparta will fall, Greece will fall, honor the gods. Like this is I think they do a good amount of world building here as well.
Yeah, I actually think the political stuff that they added, which wasn't necessarily in the 300 novel, was some of the most effective stuff in this movie. I thought that the fact that Xerxes had paid off the power in the Republic was really cool to see, and it was very satisfying to see Queen Gorgo like stab him, and like all that money falls out on the floor. That was very rewarding to see. Like, I mean, he's a pretty bad villain. Just the betrayal and like betraying your own country, and sexually assaulting Leonidas's wife in a movie with Xerxes. That guy's actually the bigger villain.
I like Xerxes as the figurehead of the unstoppable horde.
I do too.
Rodrigo Santoro actually auditioned for the role of Astanos, but director Zack Snyder was so impressed with his audition, he promoted him and offered him the part of Xerxes instead. It's interesting. He's actually only the same height. I say only, but he's the same height as Gerard Butler. So the filming techniques in order to make him look like he's that tall is just perspective. And they did this in The Lord of the Rings to make Gandalf look taller than everybody else. It's actually low tech. In a movie that was so much computerization, they just literally stand him and angle him properly so that he's closer to the camera. And then they push Gerard Butler, or whoever's talking to him, back. And they put a laser up on the wall so that, Gerard Butler's looking up at the appropriate height. And just that perspective, based on where the cameras are positioned, does that. I thought that was incredibly low tech. I just assumed they shot them separately and they stitched them together and they scaled every frame until it looked the way they did. And they said they initially started off with a 10-foot Xerxes and looked stupid. They tried every height.
We'll settle for 9.
7'5" was the final height. Xerxes.
Wembanyama.
Yeah, so he's Victor Wembanyama.
Who could totally nail that role?
Oh my god!
Just putting hands on the shoulders.
Yeah,
Hector Banana Bread.
You can hit that 3-pointer, Lena.
Again, stylish though.
Oh.
They didn't just make him tall. Like they made him like this golden, like guy with all these chains and stuff on
Oh,
him. I
yeah.
mean, all of these villains are stylized.
He's auditioning to be the face of Sephora. Like that's what's going on here. I don't even really view Xerxes as a villain. Like these are two armies that are standing in each other's way, but I don't know. He's just doing what armies did back then. He's part of the Persian Empire. The Spartans are part of. They're not even really associated with a Greek empire at this point, but they are a Greek city-state. They're just in each other's way, and it seems like Xerxes has a great deal of respect, and he's just like, what's it going to take? You're going to die. Can we not lose more men today?
Yeah, he tries diplomacy 3 times.
Right. And Leonidas is just like, I love you want our weapons, come and take them. It's like, that's a cool scene.
Yeah.
And we just,
They all are. Each overture has its own, like,
yeah.
That
So-
line, yeah.
yeah,
so-
every single one's like I'm going to tick you off a little bit more.
Yeah, that first diplomatic thing where why would you allow your women to speak among men? Because Spartan women, but why is it? Because Spartan women are the only women that give birth to real men,
Yeah. Mhm.
something like that. And it's like that's that wit you were talking about, Chad. But like
Yeah.
apparently that was written down and a real line, like from
Yeah.
history.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible.
It's not really presented as an overwhelming Greek triumph, though it never was. Herodotus doesn't present it, Siculus doesn't present it as just this overwhelming triumph. They show it as it's a pretty resounding defeat. Like they hold off for 2 days and then that's it. But the heroicism and the romanticism is just that Sparta is buying the rest of Greece time. And so that is why they're memorialized. Hey, these guys, there's some myth, you're right, Russell, of Sparta never retreats. And that's the reason that they didn't do it. It was against Spartan law to retreat. That's dubious at best. But what they're probably doing is sacrificing their lives to buy time for their countrymen to gather. And so that's why there are poems and that's why there are memorials to these guys who made this incredible stand.
I do like the "we're going to forget your name" threat that Xerxes says, "I'm going to wipe off your name. You'll never have existed." And of course, it's the opposite. We're watching a movie about the guy, and David Wenham comes back with a pirate patch and tells everybody about fighting with the Sea of Arrows, which, by the way, that looks very cool with how they render it. Comic book physics, I think, is one of those things that sets us up. This isn't done realistic in that regard. I think it is really fun. I think we haven't talked enough. It is like watching, what's the video game? Hyrule Warriors, like where you can just go mow down a gajillion people.
Yeah.
Like
You're talking
in a
about
giant battlefield.
What's the
This feels-
Japanese one?
The
There's a
Musou
Japanese-
games, they're Dynasty Warriors.
Warriors?
Dynasty Warriors. Yes.
Sure, but it feels like that. It's almost like the Immortals are incredibly bad at their job. They just almost run into the spears, but none of that matters. It's very fun to watch the actual stylized battle themselves.
They've never encountered resistance like the Spartans, so they're doing what immortals do, and for the first time in history, it doesn't work.
And I think one of the really unsung things about battle in this movie is you've got Xerxes, who is completely underestimating the Spartans just due to his numbers. No matter how many he loses during sea travel, no matter how many he throws at him. And each of these subsequent overtures that he makes toward Leonidas, whether it's from him or from one of his lackeys, Leonidas uses it to infuriate Xerxes more, which causes him to try blunt force more, which leads him to defeat more. So every part of this is very calculated into using the terrain and his troops' skill to his advantage. And each part, knowing full well at no point in time is he going to surrender, he just continues poking him. And that just increases his advantage in the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you've ever played a Total War game, you know the value of choke points. So there's military advantage in the hot springs and the hot gates. Right now, due to erosion and things like that, the beach is much farther. So if you were to visit Thermopylae, you'd see a much longer beach. It'd be like, why in the world would you choose this spot? But
Yeah, just go around.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
Capricorn 1. Why you got to climb that mountain?
man,
This was a while ago.
there were a lot of why you got to do that in Capricorn ones.
Yeah, describing it like a video game, I think, is appropriate. Describing it like incredibly, like comic book physics is very fun. You have people jumping incredibly long distances. You have a thrust that is perfect and unmoving because the spear, even from Ephialtes, I love that scene when Ephialtes thrusts his spear. Like, look, my dad taught me, and it's like
Yeah.
perfect. But he just can't raise his shield arm. Then the idea of the phalanx breaking to allow the cool shots of, I would bet, Chad, do you know the name of the sword that they use? Like, I know like a gladius is a name of a sword in like Roman time. Am I guessing wrong? Do you know the name of that sword? I only say you got a sword in your back.
I know the Roman name. It would be the equivalent of like a gladius, maybe like a
Yeah.
scudi.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But like that being able to show that stuff off, or the sheer impact of running into a Persian and knocking him back 5 feet, spears that go incredibly long distances, like this, all of this stuff is. I had mentioned spectacle before, and it's meant to be like, wow, this is fun and cool, and you get several instances of it later. The idea of could the movie be 5 separate battles in the hot gates where it's just the phalanx? The creative decision is no. Let's put them in different places. We have some early morning fights. We have one late night fight against the Uber Immortal. That one is done with like a human body wall where they spring the trap and knock the bodies down.
Meat wall.
Kind of a silly choice with the meat wall because the surprise kills one. No, sorry, doesn't even kill that immortal. It's just like a surprise. But that's when the only way in my head it makes sense is, why are they doing this non-phalanx battle with the best of Persia's forces? It's because there's the underlying goal. These Spartans do want to die in battle. So when they start dying, it's still a win for them. So like the entire framing of what these people are is built for what this movie is. You mentioned like a total war game, like they are meant to die. And so it's, I guess now that I go back to your point earlier, Russell, is that you don't get too attached to these guys. Yeah, there's 292 Spartans that are unnamed and don't have FaceTime. But there's others that I think you do have enough time to enjoy. You enjoy Astynos and Stelios being like young friends. You
Mhm.
absolutely enjoy Gerard Butler and the captain, played by Vincent Regan, also in Troy.
I'll agree with that one.
But that, like, you like these guys. I mean, I guess I can give you a little leeway and say, sure, you're not meant to get too attached to them, but you get as attached to someone that is doomed as you can, and their little relationships are fun while we have.
I would also interject that the meat wall falling and whatnot, if if you're thinking the immortals are the elite of the Persian army, and they've watched 2 days of a phalanx, then maybe the idea there is psychological. Like, oh, you just toppled down an entire wall of bodies on me. You're not fighting the way you've been fighting all along. That is an edge in and of itself over what they've already come to expect from you.
It's just a
Yeah.
complete flex of,
Yeah.
hey, we're just
Here's
gonna
your
build.
friends.
Yeah, we're gonna build this wall higher. Look what we can do.
And I guess it is recounted by Wenham's character Delios that, oh, this is also the night that we let the Arcadians play a little bit. Is we're gonna have them run in and, to quote the movie, make a real mess of things. But getting to see their style of battle, and that the one leader of the Arcadians is like, yeah, and you get to see a different style. You get to see something different, and it's just 30 seconds more. That is a net gain.
You were talking about the swords and the weaponry used. I think this was an interesting sword piece of trivia here. The weapons used in the film were previously used in movies like Alexander and Troy, and most of them were plastic. So these swords have a bit of a filmography themselves.
50% of those were good movies.
I didn't see Alexander. I think I
Don't.
got caught up in the opposite of the 300 hype up talk. Is people were kind of down on Alexander.
I lost
It's
my
long.
movie picking privileges for like a year and a half because I went to see that in theater with my wife.
I got to tell you guys, I went with my stepdad at the time to a midnight showing of that film. It was brutal.
It feels like it's 5 hours long. I know it's not, but it just drags. It
Absolutely
really
brutal.
overstays its welcome.
Even with boobs, it was brutal.
Zack Snyder, I don't always love his work, to be honest with you, but I love hearing him talk about his work. He's incredibly charismatic and talking about,
Yes.
he really likes what he's working on. And I can see why he keeps getting handed projects, because he is fun to see. He really loves the Frank Miller content. He really liked the, in order to pitch this movie, nobody wanted to make it. So he would actually take still frames from the actual comic, and then he would, add simple animations to each frame, such as just burning fire or sparkling clouds, or like these kinds of things. Or then they edited those scenes together, and they kind of had his friend Scott Glenn, who's in Sucker Punch, by the way, recorded a voiceover for the narration piece, and Warner Brothers still wasn't convinced. So Snyder actually shot a live action test, like a 90-second, 360-degree continuous shot of, the Spartan killing several Persians. That battle dynamic that we've talked about here, that is this movie's heart, and the combination of all of that. Warner Brothers finally said to Snyder and his team that they could do this. And again, Snyder didn't have a lot of stuff under his belt at this point. Miller and he bonded so much over their love of samurai movies and low-budget, gory horror movies. I mean, things that Dustin and Chad love coming together here. And when you see Snyder talk about this, you see somebody who isn't like too big for his britches, or I'm Zack Snyder and I walked into this. He genuinely loves the content. And again, I'm not always a big fan of like all of his things, or Watchmen. I can go through his filmography, Man of Steel, Batman versus Superman. I don't actually love a lot of these movies, but I continue to see Zack Snyder interviewed and sit there and go like, man, I love how much you love this stuff, and I like how much involved you are with this. And so it's cool to see him as a director be such a fanboy.
I do very much wish he had not done DC.
Yep.
And I don't mean that like, obviously I'm more of a Marvel fan than DC. We've well documented that, but I would have liked to have seen him stick with comic book projects that were not mainstream. I think that's his niche. I think that when you have passion projects like that, it comes across better when people don't have these massive preconceived expectations for them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in any way, shape, or form, after the Snyderverse, went away, saying never give this guy a comic book movie again. Quite the opposite. I'm saying Image needs to be contacting this guy. Dark Horse needs to be contacting this guy. Smaller brand comic books need to be contacting this guy. I would love to see like World Tree get made by a Zack Snyder or something like that. I think his diversity, like he's predominantly done ones that are heavily violent. I'd like to see him do something that's more intellectual, cerebral in the comic book realm.
That'd be cool.
I think he still got it. I don't think he lost anything by doing this Snyderverse, outside of maybe he learned, let's not go for this because the expectations were to be Marvel and you were never going to make that in the first place.
Yeah, Army of the Dead makes me question that theory, but otherwise I'm on board. The thing is, release the Snyder Cut, because studio interference is messing up what he's trying to do, and the Snyder Cuts are usually better than what we get in the theater. I'm with you. I kind of want to see him. This may be getting a sacred cow for you, but let him remake Tank Girl. Like, if anyone can do a stylized, fun movie like Tank Girl, I kind of want to see Zack Snyder get a shot at it.
Yeah, 100%.
I think one thing that you guys are all going to resoundingly agree, and I know Fry is, Warner Brothers really pushed hard to have this movie down to a PG-13 rating as their goal.
No.
And Snyder refused, and ultimately the studio agreed at his pushing that this needed to be an R-rated movie. Do you want the PG-13 300?
How? Like that's like watching Bad Boys on USA. Like how would you? Like it's like there's like
Showgirls was on USA, and it was
There's
like
like
80 minutes
14
long.
Yeah, there'd be like 14 words in the movie. I mean, it's like, what?
Yeah, I don't even. So we talk a lot about the machismo in this movie and the masculinity in this movie, but there are some nude scenes. Some of them I don't even think are necessary. I feel like they're almost throwing them in, like, here you go, man, you're already on board. And like, yeah, I was already on board. I don't need this. I don't need the TNA to enjoy this movie. So
They give the ladies some Gerard Butler. His whole backside is bare.
they give the ladies a lot.
There's a,
Oh,
yeah.
The ladies are having a fine time, I would say. But even without those scenes, like, you could cut all those scenes. I want to see Gladiator's what I would compare this to. Gladiator is rated R. There's nothing really in Gladiator that says it should be rated R other than gladiatorial combat where they are stabbing and cutting each other. It's very violent. Here, I want to see the same thing, and even further, because it's almost like that Sin City style. I want to see the blood spurt from the neck. I want to see the
yes.
decapitation and the ridiculous body collapsing scene. That's the type of kills you need for this type of movie to be effective. And if you're doing PG-13 and cutting away from that, why?
I want the big dude with like the nasty grill who's got two blades for arms
Yes.
to chop downward on the guy with the twisted beard goatee, and by chopping downward, the head flies into the air and spins because it's comic book accurate. I just wanted to bring up, even though I did not before the movie nor since have I been like, I need to like absorb 300 the graphic novel. But we're talking about Zack Snyder and we're talking about these Frank Miller properties. Of the list of the most faithful adaptations, it is 300 at the top. It's Sin City just two steps down. And then the last one that's like top 5 of that list is Watchmen. So these are guys, and when you talk about Zack Snyder's like ability to do this, it's because of devotion and understanding the belovedness of the source material. The first one I ever saw side by side is when Leonidas throws his spear, and it's in slow motion, and there's a lot of slow motion in this movie, but
Yes.
it's it's in slow motion, and the spear is kind of slithering up the polished stairs. It's a perfect shot of the image in the book and the rotating head. And there's so much that is like shot for shot. And that is such a love story to its source material, which is something that fanboys and newcomers alike must appreciate. And if you didn't, then listen to me and appreciate it.
Right.
The thing I was looking at the directors of the works is, have any of you seen Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole? Chad,
I have,
is
yes.
it cool?
Cool is not the word I would use, but it's
What
very
is it?
enjoyable.
Okay, it's enjoyable. Yeah. I didn't know if any of us had actually seen
It's based off of a book, and it's
a book. Yeah.
more child oriented, so it's far less Sin City and stylized.
Right. Well,
It's
but we were talking about him approaching something that wasn't heavily violent.
yeah, it's good. I mean, it is worth your time. I don't think it's closest thing I would compare it to is like the old school James and the Giant Peach. Like, I had a good time with it.
Oh, yeah.
That's high praise. This film is, though, to Snyder's credit, only 60 days, because this is a very techie, backdrop-driven movie, and only 60 days to shoot all this. Again, that is impressive. And the other thing is, Larry Fong talked about what you said, Dustin. As a cinematographer, he was pushed by Snyder to capture the angles, the feel of the book. And he said this was his most challenging project as a cinematographer. And he was really proud of, what you just said, capturing the essence of the graphic novel content in here.
I just want to paint a picture for you guys. You're in Hollywood. You just got off a long shift. You go into McDonald's. 3 to 5 sorority girls or housewives, take your pick, whatever, walk in to get
I'm
chicken
listening.
sandwiches. A mile down the road, 300 wraps up shooting, and 75 ripped dudes roll in, and they're like, I want 6 Big Macs, 2 quarter pounders, like, and they're in there just jacked, and everybody's like, I guarantee you every single one of them went out for a giant burger after that was done.
I sure hope
I
so.
Like, just the messier the better.
I know that Chris Pratt, in talking about his transformation into Star-Lord, that he was just talking about how the transformation obviously, elevated his stardom quite a bit and his popularity, but how he was just so ready to like house a couple of pizzas when filming was wrapped up.
Yeah.
Over 600 costumes were made for this. Over 60 people worked on the costumes for this. Gerard Butler had 17 specific helmets, each representing a different stage of degradation throughout the battle. It took 5 hours to apply Andrew Tiernan's hunchback makeup every day. They made these little maquettes out of the uber human and out of the hunchback character themselves. There's a lot of craft, like a monster studio, brought into here again to bring that Frank Miller feel into real life. And like you said, again, Dustin nailed it. This movie speaks of the love of the material. The story is not what I connect with this movie. It's the film creation. It's the craft in these things that I didn't take in the first time. I do really like all of this craft that goes into here. It is a stylized thing that the reason people are still watching this movie now, still talking about it, is because of how this movie looks. I would say, having not seen all of Zack Snyder's catalog, is this his biggest success?
Oh, I would say so, as far as his success in, like, without the aid of the DC bump, because this is his plus love of source material. That's the way I would frame that, as his biggest success.
Mm-hmm. What are the parts about the look of this movie do you like, Chad? Do you like these sword and sandal kind of genre movies? This one's a little bit different in terms of how it's presented.
I do, and it was Frank Miller's decision, and Zack Snyder stays faithful to it, of stripping away the Spartan armor and just having like the capes and the loincloth, and that's all they've got, and changing how the Spartans would have looked, because the Spartans would have looked identical. He gives Leonidas a plume. All of them probably would have had a plume as far as the Spartan army, especially with a higher, almost like an honor guard that's with Leonidas. They all would have had that decoration. I like the decision to allow them to move. And again, I can't praise Xerxes enough of making him just this exotic mystery. Like you could see being persuaded to join that world. He's got the velvety voice, but he's also got everything else that you could possibly want. When he gives that speech of "I am kind," like, okay, all right, I
believe you.
yeah, I believe you. When all
I want it and more,
everything
I desire.
yeah, he has that such great line of Leonidas is cruel, for he expects you to stand. I only ask that you kneel. All right, sign me up. Sign me up to be Persian. For the Persian Empire.
He's got 33 fake piercings as part of that costume.
That is such
They
a
weren't
great
real?
decision. It really is. There's no historical context, as far as I can tell, for that type of piercing, especially the nose chain back to the ear. I think that's what does it for me. That's just so unusual.
I think they were going for as decadent and as humanly possible,
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's almost
or inhumanly possible.
he's almost like painted gold.
Yeah. I mean, he constantly refers to himself as a deity. I know he said he's not a villain. They do a pretty good job of making you not like him by how they present him.
They do not. I love the dude.
Mm.
You like your villains, Chad. You like Scar from Lion King.
Dustin's
this is
gonna
you.
back
I
me
like
up.
Scar too. I'm absolutely backing you up here. There's something, we were talking about the visual delight of this movie, but there's an additional sound design delight here. The swords are plastics, but the cling clang slash stab splatter of this movie is top notch. Then you get things like when Xerxes descends his steps for the first time, and then you see some Persians come and create the last couple steps out of their bodies.
Yeah.
Very cool
Mhm.
opening, but also the shaking of his chains on his like gilded sandals it's the exact same feel of Spurs walking into the saloon.
It's the Boba Fett sound effect, yeah.
Yeah, very, very like attention paid to the right way of like the sound of the clanking. And then let's talk about his performance. The guy you said he actually auditioned for Astanos, but Rodrigo Santoro, as the decision to quiver his lip, the eye makeup being so, in a way, it's hard to say feminine, but almost like Egyptian godlike.
Mhm.
And there's so much of this that is we could have gone 10 different directions, and instead what we got, shining bronze skin. Like there's stuff about it that you might say, like, for the guys who are like macho wanting to jump in here, I know that my own friends at the time were like, why did they have to make him look so gay? And I'm like, you don't get it. You don't get it. This is art, and you have to try to convince people that are stuck in the past, or trying to use a word like that like an insult. I'm like, the idea of him putting his hands over the shoulder is this foreign discomfort is just so much part of this character, and I love it. Just to make audience members a little uncomfortable. Good. Give us more. This helps with the mystique of this character.
Well, if you watch 300 Rise of a Nation, he just walks into a cave and he comes out golden without a hair or anything like that, and all these piercings.
I do think there's a bit of just like ignorant arrogance that comes into watching something like 300 and then using a term like gay for it, because not only did that word not exist in the connotation that they mean it, but that would have meant nothing to them. Like,
Yeah.
that attitude of what they're meaning by it would
Mm-hmm.
it would be utterly foreign to them in every respect. And it's just like, what? Stop.
Mm-hmm.
They're going for contrast.
Yeah.
They do have a little of that because they call the Athenians boy lovers.
Right.
Which
Well, they do in this, but as a representation of when this was made, I just think that it's just a weird critique to have on something that is literally out there to break established protocols for what you think something is.
Very small-minded critique. Yeah.
Right.
Lazy.
But he is. I think that's the unique thing about this Xerxes portrayal. Dustin, I know you backed off of it. I think effeminate is an appropriate word. He does have this effeminate, androgynous type aura around him, and it's meant to make you uncomfortable. And that deep voice coming out of an otherwise feminine presentation is just meant to throw you off this entire time. I mean, he's got himself painted up, he's got all his jewelry on, versus these Spartans that just have next to nothing and their beards. So yeah, it's this wonderful juxtaposition. It is meant to make you uncomfortable, confuse you a little bit, in the same way that David Bowie was actively trying to confuse people.
I love the idea that
Chad said things about David Bowie that were nice, by the way, documented.
I'll even add to that. I mean, we still call things a Spartan lifestyle when it's sparse and minimalistic. So it's, I mean, I don't know, I dig it.
With Xerxes' portrayal here, it's exotic epitomized, and exotic can be either dangerous or desirable, and it's both so perfectly here.
The film did receive some criticism in this. I don't know that I completely buy in, because it's a stylized graphic novel, but it's portraying the East as this evil empire and the West as this bastion of good. And we do get the incorrect monologues from Sparta of free men, and that's a revisionist history, but I don't think there's malice behind. They're just picking, here's a foreign empire, and we're giving them monsters to make them even bigger. I don't think we're really trying to make the comparison of foreign empire, they're all monsters and they're evil. I think it's just giving them cool toys to play with.
The Immortals masks are outstanding. The kind of frowny face, angry metal masks, and otherwise black garb, black armor.
Yeah, they are very Oni like Japanese.
Kind of demonic.
Yeah. I really thought those were intimidating, and those masks still stuck out to me. Like I said, I didn't have total memory of many of the ongoings of this movie, but that piece of wardrobe has really stuck in my head. The intimidating army that stands before you with all those frowny faces.
Well, let's give credit to the Spartan helmets themselves. And I had mentioned before that there's a very particular silhouette of the helmet with Leonidas's beard sticking outward with the large plume, and his plume has also kind of a horse tail out the back. It flows so well with the spinning type movements of our fight choreography. Same with the capes, by the way, is that it's yes, Russell, those masks are cool. And when you think about the East, or you think about like samurai armor like this, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. And it's nice that if it's representing all of Asia, that yeah, we're gonna have that. We have in the quote unquote all of Asia, or I guess some of it might seem African perhaps, there's like 6 or 7 skirmishers that are painted in all white and black, wearing like animal skulls on their head. You
Mhm.
guys, these guys aren't even shown like in the fight really, but the diversity of the Persian side is really to be lauded. And then the so many ways to show off how the costumes work on the Spartan side in all of their battles. It's just so visually appealing.
Filmmakers use blue screen 90% of the time and green screen 10% of the time. And I honestly, I see green screen so much more than I used to. And I was sitting there not realizing why this was, but particularly whenever certain objects are on screen, like they can kind of go, like, disappear. So like if they're actually wearing blue, the blue screen makes them disappear. So the green screen was used far less on this one because the producers felt like the paradigm of those red garments and that slight blue tint that was in the sky worked better because it would skew towards magenta, like when they would actually do their film, rather than the green tint, which was skewing towards brown. Interesting. I hadn't really seen why you use blue versus green as much in the thought that's put into that. This movie's desaturated and takes out all the greens and out all of the blues for the most part. This is a very gold, yellow, splashes of intense red and dark grays and gray, tans and such. It's not the first movie we've seen use this palette, but this movie, it takes those filters and it amps them up considerably. And again, this is one of the other defining things.
It lives there.
I think it was interesting. You get a little more color in the scenes where Queen Gorgo's back with the Senate and stuff like that. But it's not as dramatic as, say, something like Gladiator, like where Chad said, these heavenly images of the hand on the wheat and stuff like that. This movie has its own wheat field, but they stick to it, like you said, Fry. It really lives there. What else do you like the look on in this movie, Fry?
I like the Senate. I like the Senate scene in general and how they play with shadows and light. I think it's a real unique part of this movie where everything else is outdoor and it's really makes you feel exposed to the elements, whereas this is still cold and it's still clean, but it's trying to show a little bit more like the dawning of a new opportunity in the way that they shoot the senatorial scene.
Only 2 gallons of fake blood were used in this. Everything else was added in post-production. I would have guessed this movie would have been a blood fest in terms of making a lot of fake blood, but to your point, Chad, they're not like drenched in it. It doesn't look like Evil Dead 2, like where they're all covered in it themselves. It's all flying through the air, basically.
That's who I was thinking of. Somewhere out there, Sam Raimi's really upset.
That's not enough blood.
I know that it's maybe the most frequent little bug about errors is continuity. But I think this movie does a pretty good job of if someone gets wounded or hurt, it stays.
They're still hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. The set pieces are shot in different locations. Like they take one rock and they shoot it in 17 different angles. So they're very resourceful, even with that $65 million budget that they have. Again, this is all very studio-driven work. So those set pieces that they use, they're getting the maximum benefit out of that. And again, credit to the cinematographer for making that all happen as well. Dustin, why don't you lead us off by talking about some of the music that we have here? There's a little bit of controversy with this as being potentially a borrowed score.
I actually don't want to talk about the controversy because that sucks. It's settled and it happened and acknowledged. And now they even mention, hey, this was without our knowledge borrowed from somebody, and they now give credit to that person, and like however it was re-released or in all digital media afterward. The thing that's important about the music here is what we had gotten in Troy and Gladiator was incredible score, full orchestra, the things that we have come to love about John Williams and Hans Zimmer. They do a great job with that. Whether it's Zack Snyder's decision or the group, like production, the idea of adding in like heavy riffs with bass guitar, and it's not shredding metal. Really, it's not hair. It's like hair metal stuff. It's not glam like a score in the 80s would be for like a for a high speed chase. Like instead, it's done with kind of a how do we add weight, and the music adds a lot of weight to some like the visuals you see and like the fight scenes you see are I believe like so much like projected into like stick with you for a long time because it feels like this movie is rocking, and it is. And I think that's something you'll take home with you is, or I guess not you'll take home with you, it's something that Hollywood has taken with it for a long time is busting in the door, let's have some rock with it. It's not the only way to do it is not anymore having to be just like operatic or period music. Instead, you can have the smashing of yes, sandals and swords, but also rock.
I'm guessing this is a win for you, Fry.
Although it does some things different than you would usually have in a period piece, which I appreciate for the type of movie it is, I'm not gonna like hold it up there as this is something like, oh, I get out to my car and I'm like, I can't wait to listen to the 300 soundtrack either. So it's I'm glad it is what it was. It's a credit to the film in what it does, but it's also not like, dude, the sound. Like I would one day when I get to do Atomic Blonde, I will gush about the soundtrack, but that's not what we have here. It's not bad. This isn't a knock on it at all. It's great for what it's doing.
It's more the interruptions that I think I enjoy or I take away with me of like Dustin is saying when action kicks in, you almost hear like Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song that but you get
Right.
that on the guitar. I like setting scenes up like that or interrupting an otherwise quiet scene with that. It's jarring, but it's meant to be jarring. It's like, okay, testosterone and adrenaline, here you go.
Sure.
And more importantly, the guitar in this fit the area, the geographic location where it happens, in the same way that someone would choose to listen to like the Skyrim soundtrack when touring Scandinavia. Like it's what the way they use guitar in this for a somewhat Middle Eastern Greek setting works. And it fits geographically where this is coming from in a way that, using, Gregorian chanting or something would in
Yeah.
Germany. You know what I mean? Like it benefits the location.
And we have the added benefit of when we're in the Persian tent, when Ephialtes is being essentially seduced by all the offering, you've got a cool goat playing the sitar. Just here's
He
the
said,
goat
"Hey,
man.
you must be girls."
Who brought up Kill Bill earlier? I can't remember in what context, but Kill Bill broke the mold in put the quote unquote wrong music with this fight scene.
Yeah.
And did it so perfect. The Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood disco version of Santa Esmeralda when the bride is going through or fighting against Oren Ishii at the end is maybe the best like smash juxtaposition of things that should not go together, but I love it.
To this day, I still do that whistle when I'm walking through the store at night when it's empty. And I've forgotten that I've had staff still there, and I've had multiple people be like, "Dude, you're creeping me out. You got to stop that."
Tyler Bates' score took from Elliot Goldenthal's score on Titus from 1999. However, I don't know how many people saw Titus from 1999 or know about it. So it doesn't feel good. But on the other hand, your work's been stuck into a much greater magnitude. It was the number 10 movie on the year. A lot more people were watching this movie. It has lived on in a weird way. Like you said, Dustin, his name has gone onto it in post and stuff like that. I'm sure it was solved legally, financially. In a weird way, I wonder if Elliot Goldenthal is actually thankful that his stuff is borrowed and put into this piece, because a lot more people saw 300 than Titus.
Yeah.
Truth.
I'll never truly understand. I've got musician friends that have toured the country. I've got musician friends that still actively record. I can't get in. Anybody that takes music extremely seriously, I can never attempt to guess as to the understanding of ownership when it comes to musical themes, when it comes to music like that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I was in music for a long time, I never produced it. I never really put my own original work out there. So I'll never be able to really understand that or make the right comment on it. I'm just glad to know it was, in one way or another, settled, and it doesn't seem like a scar on this movie.
No, and we've covered this a bunch of times. Well-known composers borrow from themselves heavily.
Yes.
Like,
Yes,
Hans Zimmer, Gladiator
Hans
2,
Zimmer.
Pirates of the Caribbean. It's like, okay, this is actually detracting from my enjoyment of Gladiator, my favorite movie of all time, because I keep expecting Jack Sparrow to run out.
Here's the funny thing: when Pirates came out, and the song that everybody's familiar with in Pirates, it was actually used in Wesley Snipes' Drop Zone. And I looked forever. This is way back in the 90s. And I was like, dude, I'm really digging this, film score for this. And then Pirates of the Caribbean came out, and I was like, that's it.
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Well, why don't we hand out some awards, you guys?
Let's do it.
I'm ready.
MVP, Dustin.
I don't know how I can go away from Zack Snyder. I am not a Snyder head, and I've seen, I guess, 4 of his movies. But we talked about when I first guested on the show 4 years ago, is that talking about like who's in charge of putting it all together. And that is your director, and I think this movie came together very well in so many ways that I'll just stick with. Zack Snyder did a good job.
This movie absolutely does not happen without him pushing for it so hard. So it's a very good choice. Brian, how about you? Who's your MVP?
I'm going to stand up on a soapbox on this one for one of my. He's a supporting actor, but I've got a good rationale for this. This is going to be my little David Wenham time, where but not David Wenham as necessarily his character, but as the narrator of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I just feel like his narration. I mean, I'm not going to put him in, up in like Morgan Freeman category, but we're going to be hearing his voice and stuff for a long time because of this.
He rules.
He has a very, very memorable voice. He does a great job being the narrator of this, and then how they tie him in as the narrator at the end. I feel like I can't think of another one that better ties a narrator into a story in the film than how they ended the movie.
Go watch The Notebook.
No. I'm talking about 300, Chad. Don't you bring that up here.
I guess the only one that even comes close, not even comes close, but just comes to mind is Edward Scissorhands, kind of, but you don't get the narration throughout with that.
Yeah, I mean, and then literally to find out that he was sent away, and that this is him telling the rest of the army this, that he was in effect spared by Leonidas because he has a skill no one else has, and that's his incredible oratory.
Mary would actually love your pick. She really didn't like this movie, but she said David Wenham is by far her favorite part of this movie, so she's absolutely
cool.
aligned with you on that one. Chad, who's your MVP?
Yeah, I have a rule when things go really, really well, I tend to give credit to our director, and I am a big Zack Snyder fan, at least his early work. I was a very, very happy person with. We start with Dawn of the Dead, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. Then we have 300, and we have Watchmen. I mean, he's just the beginning of his career, he could do no wrong. I was so happy. And this movie, the style, we could talk for 3 hours about it. It's just such an awesome and faithful adaptation of Frank Miller's work, and I love it.
I was a big fan of his first 3 albums. He really fell off after that.
It
Well,
did
thank
sound
you
like that. It
Thank
did.
you for making me sound like that.
The Guardians of Gahul.
I'm on board till DC, so
And honestly, Chad, you missed the chance to say you missed the chance to do Fry's music equivalent of like, I was all over Dawn of the Dead to begin with. I was on there before he was popular. So I mean,
I don't think people like Dawn of the Dead. I think
but you do.
there's a big divide. I do, and my wife, who does not like horror movies, loves that movie. So he's doing something right.
I'm going to go a different direction here. I'm going Lena Headey. So Queen Gorgo, she is a very strong character in this. Her parts were largely added by Snyder, and Miller likes these ads, by the way. Miller made changes over history. You know, they made changes in adapting it to the screenplay. Snyder made further changes, and this is one of those big changes. Her being backstabbed, basically said, I'm going to support you in the Senate, and, you know, raped terribly, or well, I guess reluctant. I don't know. I mean,
I would say, yeah. I mean that
It's
it
definitely
didn't sound like it
sexual
was going
assault.
well.
no,
Yeah.
no.
It's
I
al-
mean,
it also might be one of those qualifiers you don't have to put in. Is
Yes.
kind of a given.
she was doing it and agreeing to doing it for a cause, but it was so hard to watch. You know what I'm saying? And then it sets up such a, you know, when she kills him and return in front of the whole Republic, boy, that sure is satisfying. And none of that would happen
Very.
without that. So all of her, honestly, nobody says this. My favorite parts in the movie involved her.
I mean, the line of "I am not your queen" is just
She's great.
fantastic.
Or I'm not your king.
I'm really disappointed that the sequel, that her scenes in that were just really disappointing.
It was token Sparta.
It was anyway.
That actually might have been the worst reinforcement scene in this movie.
That's not the reinforcement scene I wanted. That's
It's
for
like,
sure.
ah, man, you just took that away from me so bad.
Yeah, I want a redo on that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Lena Headey, best supporting actor, Dustin.
It's fair to say that Wenham had a really solid run. He was like the friar in Van Helsing. He was Faramir. He's very popular in Australia. Like Wenham had a great run, but a similar run for the guys that love Troy was Vincent Regan as the captain.
Yes.
I love his character as the captain. I love his character in Troy as like the second in command of the Myrmidons. This guy is cool, and I like
Yeah.
seeing him lose it at the end. After they're all hit with arrows, he takes out 2 more, grabs the spear, pulls the one closer, screams in his face. Ooh, this is the kind of stuff that I really dig. So,
I
like,
get that.
and he's actually like quite aged now, but you could have never done wrong if you're captain of the guard or if you're second best warrior. If you need one, Vincent Regan's your guy.
Yeah.
It's a good one. All right, best supporting actor, Brian.
This is actually where I went Vincent Regan, so I'll just leave it there with Dustin's comment and be happy.
All right, Chad, best supporting actor.
I've gushed about him all episode, but Rodrigo Santoro as Xerxes. I just love everything they did. I felt like he's just kind of this lightning rod of charisma, and they sort of make him maybe not sympathetic, but he seems reasonable, and he's just so interesting. So I love that presentation and his portrayal by Rodrigo.
For a lot of the reasons that Brian said, I will follow suit. David Wenham, as Delios, was my best supporting actor.
Plus, you can say things like, what the dealios?
Yes, you also can say that. That's for sure. So that's my best supporting actor.
What the dealios?
Hidden gem, Dustin.
I've seen this movie so many times, nothing's hidden to me anymore. But I decided to go even outfield for me, and I think Chad, you'll appreciate this. I'm going with Robert Baillet or Baillet as the Uber Immortal, and I'm only choosing him because this is another one of those guys that had a little run. He's one of those ex-professional wrestlers that sometimes make it into movies, and when they do, it's always like, oh, cool. This guy had a really nice trifecta. So he is our Uber Immortal in this movie. He plays a interesting like assassin / hitman in the Sherlock Holmes movie. He's the French hitman who wields a huge hammer trying to get Sherlock.
I remember that.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's a fun character. And then I didn't even realize this. This guy is the male Russian Jaeger pilot for Cherno Alpha
Oh,
in
nice.
Pacific Rim.
Oh, all right. I didn't
So
catch that.
right. So that, I mean, he's got essentially no words in that movie, or no lines in that movie. But this is like the definitive hidden gem.
Yes.
Good job,
that's right.
Robert.
Brian, hidden gem.
Man, I truly wish I had something that good. I'm going to go with Michael Fassbender at the time because he was nobody back then. I think the only other credit I can think of seeing him in earlier was Band of Brothers. You look back on this, and I'm going to bring it up in a different part, but you want to talk about guys that I really, truly enjoy seeing in movies now that you go back and watch something back then and you're like, hey, it's you.
He's great.
Because you didn't know him at the time. So
Yeah.
yeah. So for an at the time piece, it's definitely Michael Fassbender for me.
I like that. Chad, how about you? Hidden gem.
I went with a deep cut as well. Peter Mensa. He is the dude that Leonidas kicks down the well. And
Oh, yeah.
the reason why, his delivery of this is madness, that made all the trailers back in the day. And I think it made the trailer so memorable. Yes, the kick is cool, but the lead up to it and the delivery was just as necessary. So Peter Mensa for his outrage before falling down a well. A+.
If I'm a diplomat, if I am a stranger in a strange land, coming as a peace emissary potentially, when we're walking around and having our discussion, guys, if you need to hear this, audience, if you're being steered towards the pit, try hard to walk in the other direction.
Be on the other side of the guy walking toward the pit.
If you clocked the pit, and it requires you be aware, guys, try to steer away from the pit. You might get kicked into the pit. So
well, and listen, I feel like we're overlooking a different part of this. Architecturally, if you're planning a city-state, make sure you dig a pit. You're going to need a nice, large, round, bottomless pit. I mean, it's essential in every city-state.
That's pretty much Leonidas's diplomatic policies. Kick into pit.
Yeah.
But it's like instead of the Coliseum, he's standing there and everybody's like, pit.
Yeah.
The pit.
I'm going to go with Zack Snyder's son is in this movie.
Yeah.
He plays the younger version of Leonidas in the flashback scene. That's a fun thing to have the director's own family in there. So one thing that they didn't spend a lot of time on the background was, I think this was worthy of bringing up. Didn't have to spend a lot of time on it, but I read that Leonidas had an older half-brother, Cleomens, who was an older full brother, Dorias. And because Leonidas was third in line to the throne, he was sent to a traditional school and warrior training for Spartan youth, which makes him more of a warrior. Cleomens was ascended to the throne, and Dorias left Greece in a jealous rage. And then later, during the Persian attack and the attack on Marathon, Cleomens is suspected of insanity, and he flees into exile, leaving Leonidas as the remaining heir. So he assumes the throne, having undergone this harsh training and being thrown on the ground and kicked and bleeding and all that stuff, and learning to fight in such a way that he is not your typical royalty, and again driving that juxtaposition between Xerxes and Leonidas. Now, none of this is in the movie, but I kind of wish this little add-in would be there, because
that
would have taken so much exposition.
Well, the exposition aside, we don't need that, because I think, and yeah, there's history to that, but I think we like imagining this society where even their kings are down in the ground working and men. I think it takes away quite a bit if you realize, oh, this is fluky. Leonidas is an accident of this manly king. I think it shatters that image of Sparta.
Yes, it's what differentiates this sort of the ancient leaders of battle as like your kings or your captains. It separates that from like the redcoats. All the officers are in their back, like sipping tea while the peasants go fight. Like the idea, that's heroism. When the king is ride for ruin, you want him leading the charge in this fantasy or these ancient like fantasies. So this is it makes total sense, and I agree with you, Chad. No, Russell, we don't need.
Nobody agrees with me on most things on this movie, so that is okay.
Hey, I'm Mr. Make the movie longer, and I'm like, nah.
All right, More kicking in pits, then that's what we need. All right, recast. If you had to recast somebody and put somebody else in their place, who's it going to be, Dustin?
I don't know if he's named. I think it's the Loyalist, but the actor's name is Stephen McHattie, and he's got a short little beard. He's one of the Senate members.
Yeah.
I found him unremarkable. The first time I saw it, I found him unremarkable. This time, we don't need star power. I agree with that sentiment from earlier, but if we wanted to, I thought maybe Max von Sydow.
Well, you're going with an older. Yeah, well, he's great.
Uh-huh. And the other option I had, which does fit with like the fantasy realm aspect of it, is for your Game of Thrones lovers, the guy who played Grand Maester Pycelle, Julian Glover. I thought
Okay.
that would be an interesting, because he's an endearing character actor, but that character isn't loved in Game of Thrones, and he's tricky. But I thought a little something there might be nice. This would have been before Game of Thrones anyway, so just playing around with that character. I wanted to go very deep in the roster.
Okay, Brian, recast.
I don't want to recast anybody, but I want to insert someone into this. In the same way that we got the little taste of Michael Fassbender in this, I would have liked to have seen a young Tom Hardy in this as well.
Wouldn't he be like 8?
I don't think so, because he and Fassbender also got their start on Band of Brothers. He'd probably be more like Regan's son's age.
Oh,
Like, he'd definitely be young.
He's
but-
born in 77, so he would have been 20.
I was thinking Tom Holland.
Oh, no, Tom Hardy.
Tom Hardy makes
No.
far more sense. Yeah.
Tom Holland.
I'm not
been
sure.
young, yeah.
Yeah, Tom Holland's an infant. I think that.
It's like, I want to see Tom Holland in this. Why?
No,
Oh, dude,
Tom
yeah.
Hardy. Tom Hardy.
Expose Spider-Man. Have him be one of those babies.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it made me think of my initial recast was wanting to go deep in the roster. I started saying, well, I guess if we needed more star power, who could we give more star power to? Maybe the Oracle. So that's when in my head I was thinking, do I say out loud on the show that we need to get someone more famous to be young and naked? Maybe I should
Well,
put that in the...
What a wonderful segue, Dustin, because
Okay.
I absolutely did that. Kelly Craig does a good job. But this movie, if you want strange and sexy, I gotta go Angelina Jolie. Take her out of Alexander, put her as the Oracle here. Strange and sexy is like her hallmark. That is her
Believable,
bailiwick.
yes.
If this movie were made a decade and a titch later, that would have been Anna Taylor-Joy in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
Oh.
But
she
hey,
definitely has
we
that strange.
we need
okay.
weird. Get the praying mantis girl. Yeah, praying mantis.
He does get in a lot of movies. Nobody's going to like mine because this is the reoccurring theme of the night. I should stop going last on these. My recast is Gerard Butler.
We're gonna kick you into a pit.
It gets worse.
Give him the pit.
Yeah.
From this cast alone, there's several people who would be better in the role. David Wenham, Vincent Regan, Michael Fassbender. Brad Pitt as a first choice would be good. Henry Cavill would have
Speaking
been a
of
good
hits.
choice. Also, Houseplant would be better. Anybody would be better. He's terrible, and I really didn't.
I love Henry Cavill, but he just does not have the look for this. I don't think.
Again, I listed 12 people. So if you want to get stuck on one, that's fine.
I'm ignoring the house plant because I just don't want to drive over and stab you with one of my 8 swords. But
You got to take a spear. Remember, good thrust. Good
Yeah,
thrust,
we're
Jared.
we're lucky that he's already in Pittsburgh. The pit.
Oh, he's in the pit.
But anyway, Hugh Jackman is my final answer, even though just about anybody would be better.
I love Hugh,
Yikes.
but no.
I don't know where this Gerard Butler hate comes from.
He didn't demote at all. He's just like,
He's a stoic king. Like, they're literally known for their...
any of the, the emotion, the I'm king, I'm troubled, as he came up empty. So he's
not
actually
a-
one of my big issues with this movie.
This is not a complicated character. He does not have complicated feelings.
I think he still looked very longingly at Lena Headey's character as he's leaving. Like, I think that his gaze right there at that specific scene spoke volumes.
That's true. Yeah, his queen.
I don't like Gerard Butler in anything. I wish he hadn't been cast in anything ever. I would always recast him.
You're like Lizzie with Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, I don't like Nicolas Cage either. I would almost always recast him too. So that it's like that. Yeah, it's a lot like that. So, best shot, Dustin.
Stelios runs through a bunch of fire bombs and then jumps over some spear wielders then cuts one of these bomb throwers down, and then the shot is like moving downward and upward to show a very slick like pivot, crouch, duck behind the shield. If you would ask me over the last 18 years for the best shot, I've given you 18 different options. But this one, the big fire pot pile blows up, and the shrapnel is going like past his face, and he's hiding behind the shield. That looks so good. The effects are so good. I actually paused the movie and took a picture to remind myself this was the shot. Like this was awesome. A lot of great shots, but that one was really dynamic on screen.
All right. Brian, how about you? What's your best shot?
I went a little comedic on this one. I literally put, it's the wheat field again. By the way, when constructing your city state, you need a wheat field. Nice flowing golden wheat field. Nothing says going home like a glowing golden wheat field.
We've not seen that before. You're right. That's a good idea. Chad, best shot.
It's a night scene. There's rain and there's lightning falling all around Leonidas, and his shield is tilted towards the camera. It is just a really cool image. We even get the guitar riff in the background to tell you that it's cool. And I don't need the guitar to tell me it's cool, but it helps.
My best shot is going to be what you guys have already talked a lot about. It's in the previews. It's the image of the movie to anybody. It's kicking the messenger into the pit.
Yeah. Which is awesome.
Best scene.
You'll be seeing that very, very closely very soon. The best scene is I mentioned before Stelios. Stelios and Astanos, the two young guys, and Astanos ends up losing his head a little too early, but right before that, these two young guns are fighting as a dyad back to back, with several coming from different angles. And what's fun about that scene is we knew that you could not just focus on the phalanx all movie. So we get these instances where they're fighting like in space. And so those two working together fighting in space, it's all like a little too perfect. And sometimes you might say, well, that doesn't seem realistic, but gosh, those two, there's an added bonus to when you slice or when you put a lot of pressure with your shield. They both do a really good job of like emoting with their face, of like a ki with a like karate move. They are screaming with each slice, and it seems very real. I love that scene.
All right. Brian, best scene.
I think I've probably alluded to it enough, and the more I think about it, it's got to be it. But it's the pan out to Delios actually being, why he's narrating the shot or the thing, and
so
you've
cool.
got the entire Spartan army there. Oh. Again, I know I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. It's not a reinforcement scene, but man, it's like the next place to it, and that was really cool.
Oh yeah, it's totally, you're screwed now.
Chad, best scene.
I've talked about mine a lot, and it's the Xerxes I Am Kind scene with Ephialtes and just everything in the background. Dustin mentions the sitar playing, the women dancing. There's just so much hedonism going on. There are so many great quotes that are coming. I've mentioned several of them. It's easy to be sucked into the Persian trappings and understand, okay, maybe my life could be this, and how tempting that is.
Chad's selling out to Xerxes.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
All right. Best scene for me is going to be, I've mentioned this as well a lot too. It's when Queen Gorgo, Lena Headey, comes and speaks to the Senate and has been double-crossed by Senator Tiernan. She stabs him, played by Dominic West, and he drops all that Persian gold on the floor. It's set up so well because of how hard that scene was before it. So, and she utters that amazing line too of, it's repeating his own words back to him as he's dying. This will not be over quickly. You will not enjoy this. I am not your queen.
And it's right in the gut too. So I mean, he probably like laid there for a while in his own filth.
Yeah.
With a movie of a lot of tough moments and I thought this one was one of the best, like most satisfying. Like that was really cool. So I'm so glad they added all this, Republic stuff in there. I wish we had spent more time in Sparta because I was so interested in all the political shufflings of getting the army to come back them up. This was cool.
We'll set you up a folding chair right near the Senate. It's also right near this other feature we have. We call it the pit. I think you'll really like the seat that we have.
A lot of our major decisions happen next to it. You want to sit right here.
I know. I need to go in the pit. I know. I told Chad for months. I don't think this is a good idea for me to be on this episode.
I mean,
you can not like the movie. I just don't know what your problem is with Butler.
You started this thing and shanghaied all of us. There's no way you weren't going to be on the 300th episode. That's stupid.
And we will be introducing you to the pit very soon.
Yeah. Well, it unfortunately it does make numeric sense, which is hard to argue with your logic there. So I regret the number of this, the name of this movie. I wish they had named it something else now. Just something that doesn't have an episode anniversary aside. Had it only been 301, we might not have been able to go this route. But anyway, here we go. It's brought to you today by the number 300. Now the count will count to 300 for you. 300 scary bats. All right. Best wardrobe or makeup moment? Dustin, a lot of loincloths here.
It's a lot of loincloths. It's a lot of hunks, but I think it's the capes. Now, there's a lot of options, but I think it's the capes. They move and flow so well in the fight scenes, but there's also something where they're of the general sepia tone. If you were to cut these into like comic panels, the red on their back would be fun to ink or to paint. So I thought the red was really cool there, and you compare that to like Michigan State Spartans, with their green. This movie doesn't work with green. It's got to be red.
Brian, how about you? Best wardrobe or makeup moment?
I mean, it's got to be Xerxes. It's easily the most elaborate and also the most flamboyant. So, I mean, it's perfect for this film. Like, I wouldn't have changed anything about that.
Okay. Chad, how about you? Best wardrobe or makeup moment?
Yeah, unsurprisingly, Xerxes. Flamboyant deity.
Nobody picks the Hunchback.
He's good too, but he's towered over by a gold deity.
Okay. I really liked the water dance suspended filming of the Oracle. It's
I bet you did.
It is alluring. There's no doubt about that, but it's also visually really cool stuff that they're doing here. So I didn't necessarily need the hideous guys licking her face, but that was super gross.
It is gross. It's good.
But aside from that, the actual like fortune telling dance thing, the layers of transparency and stuff like that, it was spicy. Change one thing, Dustin.
I have already mentioned the Stelios and Astanos fighting as a pair. And we were talking about the very few Spartans that you get to know. How, even though, we know that Astanos is the captain's son, Stelios is just another young man. But how cool would it have been to have those two fighting in like a young man, quick, agile way, then smash cut to the captain and Leonidas as the old heads doing the same thing, to where these Spartans, no matter what age they are just as formidable in different styles, to kind of kick back and forth. Essentially, I'm just saying, for the sick fight movie, can we add more sick fights? That's what I'm saying. I think that'd be great.
All right. I'm going to say my change one thing is to take the focus off the losing effort of 300 men and make this more about the unification of the Greek city-states that hold off Persia successfully. I would like the 300 battle to be early and to be a catalyst for what is to come, where Greece wins. And I would enjoy this a lot more.
Russell, prepare your dinner and eat hearty. For tonight, you dine in hell.
In the
Because
pit,
you are going into the pit. And I am walking to Pittsburgh to make sure you go in head first. I'm going to swirly you into the pit.
Speaking of anachronism, that actually is based on a real line.
Swirlies?
They said tonight we will dine with Hades. They don't have the concept of hell, but Leonidas did say we will dine with Hades.
I sandwiched my bad opinion with your good ones. So, all right, Chad, how about you? What is your change one thing?
I don't like the sequences with the wolf. I don't think it's necessary,
I like that.
and it almost
That I
almost
liked.
always takes you out of the story. It doesn't add anything. So I'm shortening the movie and making it more coherent or leaving room for more awesome fight scenes. And of course, you like the backstory with a wolf.
It looks so cool. Like that, it goes full. It goes full Sin City there. Like the figure ground. I don't know. The wolf. I don't know.
There's no need. We understand. Like Leonidas is awesome. I don't need to know that as a young boy he encountered a wolf and had to fight it.
Brian, change one thing.
If I'm going to change something, which I probably would, but I think that I would have chosen either crazy mutants on the battlefield or crazy mutants in the brothel tent. I don't think I necessarily needed both.
Yeah, you did.
Again, not saying I would change anything, but I think maybe Crazy Mutant Brothel Tent was probably the lesser of the two that were needed for the film.
That's a bridge too far. Fair.
Also, if we're making this movie longer, then we got to see some slaughter at the end battle. With the big charge. At least give me some. Half the Persian army drops their swords and runs away. The ones that do stay get quickly massacred.
Let's mix it up here a little bit. Chad, why don't you go with your best quote first?
I just had to go with our arrows will blot out the sun and the way it's spat out, and then we will fight in the shade. It's just so awesome. I can't get past it.
All right. Brian, how about you? Best quote?
For this one, I went, haven't you noticed? We've been sharing our culture with you all morning.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I'm assuming the most iconic line of this is just simply, "This is Sparta," as he kicks him into the pit. But
Absolutely, yeah.
but
Which you will become quite familiar with soon.
I gave it earlier, but it's hard not to say, this will not be over quickly. You will not enjoy this. I am not your queen. So that would be my best quote. Dustin, how about you? Best quote?
It's long, and it's a monologue deserving of like being in the upper echelon with the other things that are quotable, and it is in the pleasure tent with Xerxes talking to Ephialtes. And I had to write it all down because it does the way that you kind of say he's the leader of the other army, and he's the enemy of the Spartans, but is he villain? It's hard to say. So we've got in that deep voice of his that your gods were cruel to shape you so, friend Ephialtes. The Spartans too were cruel to reject you, but I am kind. Everything you could ever desire, every happiness you can imagine, every pleasure your fellow Greeks and your false gods have denied you, I will grant you, for I am kind. Embrace me as your king and as your god. Lead my soldiers to the hidden path that empties behind the cursed Spartans, and your joys will be endless. You will find I am kind. Unlike the cruel Leonidas who demanded that you stand, I require only that you kneel.
Well delivered, by the way. I got the chills just now.
What an incredible monologue. It's so good. And the thing is, it was so impactful to me in the theaters that like it was one of those things where out of nowhere, like me and my friends would just be like, you will find. I am kind.
Yeah.
We just kind of over and over. He's larger than life in this movie.
That's what I'm saying. That scene had 3 or 4 awesome quotes just
Yeah.
strung together, and it's charismatic and delivered in such a way that I'm swayed. He's kind.
And there's the filming up close on his face. There's like looking up at him. He is surrounded by like these concubines, but like he doesn't care. His sole focus is on like manipulating this Ephialtes, and I don't know. I wasn't expecting to be like the close-up shots on his quivering lips is just so weird and delightful.
All right, we have come full circle, and on a 5-star scale, with half-star intervals. Chad, what are you going to give 300?
I'm going 4.5 on this one. I recognize this movie is probably deeply flawed, has a ton of issues, but it's like sweet spot for me. I love sword and board movies, and I feel like this one just has personality for days. To paraphrase Gladiator, I am entertained.
All right, and Brian, how about you? What is your your rating.
This is solid 4 stars. This hits so many different entertainment factors. I like really just about every part of this. So yeah, solid 4.
What keeps it from going higher for you?
It's one of those things, I think in my brain I recognize this is not a 5-star movie and never should be.
Right.
But to me, it's a
It can be if you like it enough. It's a 5 for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're not Siskel and Ebert here. They're dead.
I'm not saying it has to be Academy Award winning. There's just something about this type of movie that your brain just says, this cannot be in the halls of great movies.
It can be if you want it to be.
I think if I were Siskel and Ebert, I'd be able to tell you why I'm giving it a 4 out of 5 and not a 5 out of 5. But I think Chad's right. It's just a gut call. Like I feel like it's a 4-star movie.
I do appreciate this movie more than I had before. I am glad that I revisited because I had very negative connotations of this movie. I'm going to go up to a 2-star. Studying the movie, enjoying you guys enjoying it. I know I'm in the minority, and that's why I'm not going last. Chad has actually picked up a knife, and he's stabbing his screen. I've never been gladder I'm not doing an in-person recording.
This would be a sword. This is not a knife. This is only a knife in Australia and Crocodile Dundee's wielding.
I thought that was a very heavy-duty letter opener, but nevertheless, I'm being stabbed, and it's not
your choice, Russell. The sword or the pit. All right, so I like the way that you guys described it. It's like at your heart, you know it's not a 5-star, and objectively, you I think could fairly say that there are flaws. Russell, I don't think you're crazy for saying you don't think the acting is a strong point, or that you would say that it is a weak point or a bad point. I don't think that's crazy to say. But when you think about like certain movies and certain genres, sometimes get the detractor of, well, that genre isn't my genre, so it might be good for that genre, but I can't elevate it up because it's not like generalizable to me as an audience member or as an audience in general. So I understand that. Now, I'm going to let my bias come in. This is a 5-star movie for me because I am the kung fu fighting. This is my bailiwick. This is my wheelhouse. If you were to bring me onto the show, I think what my first dealer's choice was Hero. I try to add more kung fu. I try to add more fighting, more battles, more swordsmanship. This is stuff that is you almost can't be dull with it, which is maybe unfair as far as entertainment value. But quick quotes, style out, bursting out of the seams. This is one of those, like, I guess I am only about 2 years, 3 years different than you guys. Maybe I hit it at a certain time where it's like, this is so cool, and it always will be. So for me, I'm not afraid to say, like, yeah, the bias is hitting, and this is my kind of movie, my kind of genre, 5-star.
And I love that you went there. I really expected you to go 5 as well, Chad.
It's close. It's close. I think the historian in me has to
Oh yeah,
just
that's a good point.
reconcile with it. It's like, no, you can't love this as much as Gladiator. You can't have that.
All right, well, we got to pick a movie for next time. Dustin, do you want to help me pick a movie?
Yeah, I got you, man. After all this fighting, well, it's time for us to get some love. Option number 1 from 1936, Camille. A Parisian courtesan must choose between the young man who loves her and the callous baron who wants her, even as her own health begins to fail. Option number 2 from 1939, Ninochka. A stern Soviet woman sent to Paris to supervise the sale of jewels seized from Russian nobles finds herself attracted to a man who represents everything she is supposed to detest. Or option number 3 from 1957, Love in the Afternoon. A middle-aged playboy becomes fascinated by the daughter of a private detective who has been hired to entrap him with the wife of a client. What's it going to be?
I'm going to go with the oldest of those. The 1936, we don't go back this far often, so let's go to Camille.
All right. Alexander Dumas.
Well, thank you guys so much. I love doing the show with you, and this is
300.
300 feels amazing that we've celebrated 300 of these shows. I want to do a whole bunch more of them, and please don't kick me in the pit. I'm sorry. I tried not to be here.
The idea that you'd be so foolish to waste your breath as to mention any other option besides your inevitable fate, which is, of course, the pit.
I just like that. I tried not to be here.
He did. He tried not to be.
It's Dante from Clerks, I'm not even supposed
I'm
to
not even
be
supposed to
here
be
today. So, if only I could join Lizzie with, I can't be here. So, all right. Well, thank you, all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. So subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like on Facebook, on Instagram, and Twitter at @movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. And producing and providing this podcast is fun but not free, so we invite you to support our show at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. All contributions are much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listener. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Brian?
As a mob, they were a single organism. In fear, they divide. In death, they become lonely as I weave them into my twitching meat carpet.